somewhere in America right now. There's a man in his 60s who remembers the exact moment he fell in love with Detroit iron. Maybe it was a GTO pulling out of a dealership in 1965. A Corvette at a car show his father took him to. The sound of a 427 big block echoing down an empty highway on a Friday night. He thinks he knows American cars, but what if everything he's ever been told about Detroit's greatest machines is only part of the story? Behind the showroom floors, behind the press releases, behind the official history, there was another story being written. Inside locked design studios and secret test tracks, American engineers were building things that had no business existing. Cars so radical executives got nervous, so powerful lawyers got involved, so far ahead of their time, they were buried before you ever got the chance to see them. One was fast enough to embarrass a Ferrari. One had a V16 engine and 1,000 horsepower. One was literally destroyed by the company that built it because it was too good. And number one on today's list? It could run on Perfume, I'm not kidding. 10 secret American cars hidden from history. And by the time we reach number one, I promise, you will never look at Detroit the same way again. Dodge Copperhead. We start in 1997, at the height of the Viper era. Back in the early 1990s, Chrysler had done something extraordinary. They took a concept that was supposed to stay on a show floor, a raw, violent, completely impractical sports car, and actually built it. The Dodge Viper arrived in 1992 like a missile with a windshield. 8-liter V10, no traction control, no ABS. 450 horsepower that would absolutely punish anyone who wasn't paying attention. The world went crazy. But here's the problem Chrysler's engineers couldn't shake. The Viper was $50,000 in 1992. That's nearly $110,000 in today's money. A lot of enthusiasts who desperately wanted one simply couldn't get there financially. A whole generation of younger buyers who loved what the Viper represented were being locked out. So a small team at Chrysler asked a genuinely dangerous question. What if we built a lighter, more accessible sports car? Something a working American could actually afford, with Viper DNA in every curve. That question gave us the Dodge Copperhead. Revealed at the 1997 Detroit Auto Show, the Copperhead stopped traffic. Lightweight aluminum chassis, a 2.7-liter V6 engine, a proper 6-speed manual transmission, and styling that was unmistakably descended from the Viper. The same aggressive front end, the same muscular haunches, the same sense of barely contained energy. The reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Automotive journalists were writing breathlessly about when it would go on sale. Dealers were raising their hands. Survey data showed genuine consumer demand. Everything pointed to a green light. And then Chrysler's financial executives ran their numbers. And they discovered something that terrified them. The Copperhead might not just attract new buyers. It might cannibalize Viper sales. Why would a customer stretch to $50,000 for a Viper if they could get 80% of the experience for $25,000? So instead of finding a way to let both cars coexist, instead of growing the brand by giving two different audiences two different products, they killed the Copperhead before it ever saw a production line. One of America's greatest missed opportunities, gone in a boardroom decision that took probably 20 minutes. Today, the Copperhead exists only in photos and automotive memory, and every time a young enthusiast can't afford the sports car they want, this is the car that should have been there for them. Pontiac Rageous. The late 1990s were a strange, experimental time in American automotive design. Companies were taking risks, breaking rules, sometimes brilliantly, and sometimes in ways that left the public genuinely confused about what they were looking at. The Pontiac Rageous falls firmly into that second category. Revealed in 1997, the Rageous looked like what would happen if a sports coupe, a pickup truck, and a spaceship from a mid-budget sci-fi film had a design meeting and couldn't reach a consensus. It was massive, angular, almost intimidating in its visual aggression. The powertrain was serious. A capable V6 engine positioned in a vehicle that could be configured almost however the driver needed. Sports coupe mode, cargo hauler mode, and in one of the more audacious design choices of the entire decade, The rear roof section could be completely removed, creating an open-air driving experience in what was essentially a utility vehicle. The automotive press didn't know what to do with it. Pontiac was describing a vehicle category that simply didn't exist yet. American car buyers in 1997 wanted trucks or they wanted cars. The idea that you might want something that did both, something that rode like a car, carried things like a truck, and looked like neither, was considered too niche, too unusual, too ahead of the market. The Rageous was shelved, another Pontiac concept lost to the archives. And then something remarkable happened about 20 years later. Ford launched the Maverick. Hyundai launched the Santa Cruz. Two small pickup trucks built on car platforms. Exactly the vehicle category the Rageous was describing in 1997. Both became immediate bestsellers. Both proved there was a massive, underserved market for exactly what Pontiac imagined. The Rageous was 25 years too early, which is either the most frustrating thing in American automotive history or the most impressive piece of market foresight anyone in Detroit ever demonstrated. Depends on how you look at it. Chevrolet Aerovette. Here's a fact that's going to mess with every Corvette fan watching this video. America almost had a mid-engine Corvette in 1977, not 2020, 1977. This story starts in 1969, inside GM's experimental vehicle program. A small team of engineers, working under the designation XP882, began developing a Corvette concept that broke every rule the car had followed since 1953. Instead of the traditional front-engine, rear-wheel drive layout, they were building something genuinely exotic. Mid-engine, low-wide stance, European supercar proportions with American muscle car presence. The initial power plant was a rotary engine, borrowed inspiration from Mazda's technology, which GM was seriously evaluating at the time. When the rotary proved troublesome in development, they swapped in what they should have started with, a proper V8. And then something happened that stunned even the people working on it. GM executives didn't just admire the XP882, they approved it for production. For a brief, extraordinary moment in the early 1970s, America was going to have a mid-engine Corvette nearly half a century before the C8. The car was renamed the Aerovette. Final production approval came tantalizingly close to being signed. Then leadership at GM changed. New executives came in with different priorities, different risk tolerances, and a different vision for what the Corvette should be. They looked at the Aerovette and made the decision that Corvette fans have been arguing about ever since. They said America wasn't ready. They shelved it, went back to the traditional layout, and Corvette enthusiasts spent the next 47 years wondering what could have been. Here's the postscript that makes this story truly extraordinary. When the mid-engine C8 Corvette arrived in 2020, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Collectors pre-ordered. First-year models sold for massive premiums at auction. Car and driver called it one of the greatest American cars ever built. The market was obviously ready. It was ready in 1977 too. GM just couldn't see it. Oldsmobile Aerotech. This wasn't a car. This was a weapon system with license plates. In the late 1980s, General Motors gave Oldsmobile a very specific assignment. They wanted a proof-of-concept vehicle, something that could demonstrate the capabilities of GM engineering at its absolute limit. No compromises, no production concerns, no accountants asking uncomfortable questions. Build the fastest thing you can. Oldsmobile built the Aerotech. The bodywork came from people who thought about airflow for a living. Every surface, every vent, every curve was engineered around a single purpose: minimizing drag and maximizing downforce at extreme speed. It looked like something from a NASA wind tunnel, because in many meaningful ways it came from exactly that kind of thinking. They put A.J. Foyt in the driver's seat, one of the greatest racing drivers in American history. A man who had won the Indianapolis 500 4 times and had forgotten more about going fast than most people ever learn. Foyt pushed the Aerotech to 253 miles per hour. In 1987, let that number sink in. 257 miles per hour on an American car. In 1987. The year Michael Jackson released Bad. The year The Simpsons first appeared on television. 257 miles per hour. That speed wasn't officially broken by a production car until the Bugatti Veyron arrived in 2005, nearly 2 decades later. And yet, the Oldsmobile Aerotech is almost completely unknown today. While the Corvette and Mustang were building their legends in popular culture, the Aerotech was setting land speed records and disappearing into a museum. No movie deal, no car show legend status, no documentary series, just a record book entry that almost nobody knows about. That's the tragedy of the Aerotech, the most obscure 257-mile-per-hour automobile in American history. Chrysler Me 412, January 2004, Detroit Auto Show. The mood in the American automotive press heading into that show was complicated. Chrysler was fighting for its identity. The European supercar conversation was dominated by names that ended in vowels: Ferrari, Lamborghini, Pagani. American manufacturers were respected for trucks and muscle cars. But the hypercar conversation wasn't theirs. Then Chrysler walked in with the ME 412, and the room changed. This wasn't a styling exercise with a fake engine and a hollow chassis. The ME 412 was fully functional. It worked. And what it was doing under that carbon fiber skin was genuinely extraordinary. A quad-turbocharged V12 engine, 850 horsepower, 850 pound-feet of torque, 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 3 seconds. A claimed top speed of 248 miles per hour. That put it in direct competition with the Enzo Ferrari, the Porsche Carrera GT, and a Bugatti project that the world wouldn't see completed for another year. The carbon fiber bodywork was so beautifully executed that international automotive journalists were openly asking whether it had been designed in Modena. The answer was Chrysler's Auburn Hills Design Center, which made the moment even more satisfying. Internal conversations about limited production did happen. Chrysler executives reportedly discussed building small numbers for wealthy buyers. The engineering groundwork was there. Then the financial reality arrived. Chrysler was already dealing with serious structural problems that would eventually lead to a 2009 bankruptcy filing. The capital required to bring a hypercar to production, properly with the engineering rigor it deserved, simply wasn't available. And in 2005, the Bugatti Veyron launched. Officially 1,001 horsepower, 253 miles per hour. The car that defined what a hypercar could be. Chrysler's ME 412 could have beaten it to market. America could have held that title. Instead, Veyron became the legend. And the ME 412 became a very beautiful question mark in a Detroit warehouse. Number 5. Cadillac 16. Before we talk about the Cadillac 16, we need to talk about what Cadillac used to be. In the 1920s and 1930s, Cadillac wasn't competing with Rolls-Royce and Bentley. Cadillac was setting the standard that Rolls-Royce was trying to meet. The 1930 Cadillac V16 was considered by many automotive historians to be the finest production automobile in the world. Not in America, the world. By 2003, that legacy had faded. Cadillac was making very good cars. But they weren't making statement cars. They weren't making cars that made people stop in the street. And so, Cadillac's design team decided to do something about it. The Cadillac 16 arrived at the 2003 Detroit Auto Show, and it was a message, not a car. The message was, we remember who we are. A 13.6-liter V16 engine. Not a typo. 13.6 liters, 16 cylinders, 1,000 horsepower, and a torque figure, 2,000 pound-feet. That sounds physically impossible until you consider the physics involved and realize it's actually not. The design matched the ambition. This was the longest, widest, most imperious American automobile since the great Cadillacs of the Depression era. The hood stretched forever. The interior combined handcrafted wood panels, premium leatherwork, and technology that felt genuinely futuristic. Wealthy buyers showed up at Cadillac dealerships and asked about ordering one. Not browsing, actually trying to place orders. Two things killed it. First, the political environment around fuel economy was tightening rapidly. The V16 engine consuming fuel at the rate the 16 would have burned. It was becoming a liability, not a luxury. Second, 2008 happened. The global financial crisis ended conversations about $300,000 American luxury automobiles before they could reach any conclusion. The 16 was shelved, and Cadillac's chance to reclaim the crown they'd held in the 1930s disappeared with it. Some automotive historians still argue this was the car that could have made Cadillac relevant in the ultra-luxury segment again. They're probably right. Pontiac. This might be the most heartbreaking cancellation in the entire history of General Motors. It's 1964. Pontiac is on fire. The GTO has just launched and is selling so fast that dealers can't keep them in stock. The brand is hot, creative, and confident. Engineers are energized. And then a small team creates something that makes everyone in the building stop what they're doing. And the Pontiac Banshee. Here's what made it dangerous. The Banshee was lighter than the Chevrolet Corvette. It cost less to build than the Corvette, and by virtually every aesthetic measure. And this is not a controversial statement among the people who have seen it. It was more attractive than the Corvette. That last point was what killed it. Corvette executives saw the Banshee and understood immediately what would happen if it reached dealerships. The Corvette had spent over a decade building its identity as America's sports car. It had survived near cancellation in its early years. It had earned its place. And now here was a Pontiac from the same parent company that threatened to make the Corvette's value proposition look ordinary by comparison. They pushed back at the highest levels of GM management. And instead of letting both cars exist, instead of giving America two world-class sports cars instead of one, GM chose the Corvette and killed the Banshee. A car died because it was too good. Let that land for a moment. A car was canceled not because it failed, but because it succeeded too much in testing, because the executives in charge of a competing product were threatened by it. The Pontiac Banshee is the greatest what-if in the history of American automotive design, because unlike many canceled concepts, this one was demonstrably ready. The engineering was there, the design was there, the market was there. All that was missing was the willingness to let it live. Ford GT90. In 1995, Ford Motor Company had something to prove. The context matters here. America had scored its most famous supercar victory in 1966 when the GT40 won Le Mans and beat Ferrari in the process. That victory was the stuff of legend. But by the 1990s, that story was 30 years in the past, and the supercar conversation was firmly European property again. Ford decided it was time for a statement. They called it the GT90. The design came from Ford's New Edge philosophy, the idea that automotive styling should be sharp, angular, and unafraid of tension. On the GT90, that philosophy was taken to its logical extreme. Massive air intakes, an almost architectural angularity that made European supercars look soft by comparison. It looked like it was moving at 100 miles per hour while standing still. Under that dramatic hood, a quad-turbocharged V12 producing 720 horsepower, Ford claimed a top speed of over 250 miles per hour, which would have placed it among the fastest production cars on Earth. Full stop. This was Ford's direct challenge to Ferrari, Lamborghini, and anyone else in the supercar conversation. The public response was overwhelming. Car magazines put it on covers. Automotive journalists wrote about it in language usually reserved for Italian exotica. Survey data showed enormous purchase intent among the wealthy buyers Ford was targeting. Ford's board reviewed the numbers. Engineering costs were too high. The timeline to production was too aggressive. The financial commitment required was too significant relative to projected return, and the GT90 was shelved. Today it exists as one of the most dramatic show cars in American automotive history. A reminder that when Ford's designers are genuinely unleashed, The result can stop the conversation in any room in the world. The GT90 deserved to be built, and the fact that it wasn't is one of the great disappointments in American supercar history. Vector W8. In the late 1980s, one American man had a vision that was equal parts brilliant and impossible. His name was Gerald Wiegert, and his creation was the Vector W8. If you've never seen one, take a moment. Because this car is genuinely unlike anything else American engineering ever produced. The body was so low and so aggressive that it almost appeared to be designed by someone who had never seen an automobile, only fighter jets. Because in many ways, that was exactly the inspiration. The aerodynamic principles that governed military aircraft were applied, as literally as possible, to a road vehicle. The cockpit, and that's the only appropriate word for it, was festooned with aviation-style instrumentation, switches, gauges, and controls that belonged in an F-14, not on a public road. The driving experience was reportedly overwhelming in the best possible way, and the performance matched the theater. A twin-turbocharged V8 engine producing serious, genuine horsepower, quarter-mile times that embarrassed purpose-built sports cars, a top speed that put it in legitimate supercar territory. For a moment in the late 1980s, celebrities wanted one. Jay Leno reportedly considered buying one. The Vector appeared in magazines, on posters, in the dreams of American car enthusiasts who wanted proof that supercar engineering didn't have to come from Italy. Then the production nightmares began. Cash flow problems, management disputes, quality control failures on the cars that were completed. The company changed hands in contentious circumstances. Gerald Wiegert himself was eventually pushed out of the company he'd founded. By the time the dust settled, fewer than 20 Vector W8s had ever been built. The ones that survived are now worth astronomical sums. They represent something specific and important in American automotive history. The moment when one person's absolute conviction that America could build a world-class supercar came closer to succeeding than almost anyone remembers. Gerald Wiegert was right about the concept. The execution just ran out of road. Chrysler Turbine car. Everything else on this list was canceled before it reached. People, this one actually did, and that makes the Chrysler Turbine car story both more remarkable and more heartbreaking than anything else we've talked about today. In the early 1960s, Chrysler's engineering team made a bold prediction. The internal combustion gasoline piston engine, the engine that had powered every American car ever built, had a limited future. Fuel costs would rise, emissions regulations would tighten. The technology would hit a ceiling, and they believed they had the answer: a jet turbine engine, the same basic technology that powered commercial aircraft, adapted, miniaturized, and installed in a road car that American families could drive. To the grocery store, the implications were extraordinary because a turbine engine can burn almost anything with sufficient energy content and combustibility. Diesel fuel, kerosene, vegetable oil, heating oil, jet fuel, and yes, in a demonstration that became one of the most memorable moments in American automotive history, Chrysler engineers filled the tank with Chanel No. 5 and drove it around a test track. The car, Chrysler built approximately 55 turbine cars between 1963 and 1964, dressed in coachwork designed by Ghia of Italy. A copper-bronze body with circular turbine exhaust outlets in the rear fenders that announced exactly what was under the hood. The design was simultaneously futuristic and elegantly restrained. It looked like a car from 1975 and 1963, and then Chrysler did something that no American manufacturer before or since has attempted at this scale. They gave them away, not sold. Gave that approximately 203. American families, teachers, factory workers, nurses, parents, were selected to drive these turbine-powered machines as their daily transportation. For periods of up to 3 months each, on public roads, ordinary American cities. The program ran for 2 years. The families reported back. The turbine was quiet. The car was smooth. It started immediately, regardless of temperature, an enormous advantage in northern winters. The fuel flexibility was genuinely useful. But the problems were real. Fuel economy at city speeds was poor. The turbine was most efficient at sustained high RPM operation. Not ideal for stop-and-go commuting. Production costs were staggering. Each car reportedly cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to build. Federal emissions regulations that were tightening through the late 1960s presented challenges that turbine technology struggled to meet, and so Chrysler made the decision. Most of the turbine cars were recalled and destroyed, not stored, not auctioned, destroyed. Of approximately 55 cars built, only 9 are known to survive today. The Smithsonian Institution has one. The Henry Ford Museum has one. A handful are in private collections. 9 cars. Think about what those 9 cars represent. The moment when America genuinely tried to imagine a completely different automotive future. When Chrysler's engineers put thousands of ordinary American families behind the wheel of jet turbine technology and asked whether the world was ready to move on from gasoline. The answer ultimately was no. But the question was extraordinary, and on a quiet day, in a museum somewhere, one of those 9 copper bronze survivors is sitting under careful lighting, proof that America once dreamed bigger than anyone gives it credit. For that's the Chrysler turbine car, and it remains the greatest lost invention in American automotive history. 10 cars, built in America, by American engineers who believed they were building the future. Some were killed by corporate fear, some by financial reality, some by the simple fact that the world wasn't ready, or the men in charge of deciding what the world was ready for made the wrong call. And one was built by ordinary dreamers in Detroit who handed it to ordinary American families and said, "Tell us what you think." That's the American automotive story that most channels never tell you. So I want to hear from you right now. Which car on today's list hit you hardest? Which forgotten American machine do you think deserved to exist? Drop it in the comments. Every single one gets read. If this kind of American automotive history is what you come here for, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. We dig into these stories every single week. The ones that got buried, the ones that got erased, the ones that deserved better. See you next time.